And now it's my pleasure to introduce Cynthia, who's an independent entomologist with a master's degree in entomology and nematology. She's passionate about the conservation of insects and spiders. She's using macro photography, artistic drawing, and writing to feature the uniqueness and value of insects in our wild, domestic, aquatic, and agricultural habitats. She endeavors to inspire curiosity, to engage others in learning more about the role of insects and spiders in these ecosystems. She lives on San Juan Island with her husband, her kitties, who I've been hearing about, one bearded dragon, Drago, and pet spiders, including Elvira, who's a black widow spider that I also had the pleasure of hearing about this morning. Cynthia, thank you for coming to Orcas to share with us.
My name is Cynthia. I'm really happy to be here. I'm so thrilled. We had such a beautiful day today. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I put this together with a bit of art from a local San Juan Island artist, Daisy Lorraine, and she does some pretty incredible murals, but she wanted to help out and participate, contribute. So it's titled Got to Get Back to the Garden. I came up with this theme because many of you may remember Joni Mitchell. She was my inspiration for the presentation. Her songwriting continues to influence our lives. And when I told my husband I was going to do the talk, and he's like, I think this would be a great song to base your talk over. And I liked it and started kind of thinking about it and how Joni Mitchell inspired so many people. And it continues to do so with her music. And I wanted to use her song, Got to Get Back to the Garden, to inspire you to think about bugs a little bit differently. When we think about the phrase, got to get back to the garden, for me, it invoked an image of nature unspoiled, a utopian paradise, a place where there is no pestilence, famine, or environmental degradation from human activity and climate change. It's a garden of diversity where all creatures are welcome. How do we change our perspectives from what we have learned in the past, shaped largely by an industry that has capitalized on promoting products for us to buy because we need them? The power of suggestion is strong. The agrochemical company has the product to sell. Spray the little dandelion in your yard and get rid of the ugly little beast. Shake all sorts of powders around your vegetable beds, spray fruit trees. We bought into this lock, stock, and barrel for many years, unfortunately. So what's the apple here for? For me, the apple is an example of how we've segued onto our own path, free will, if you like. We made choices and now we've created a little bit of a mess. So before you judge me, I do like apples, but how many of you may have in the past or now spray your apple trees with something or another at some point of the year? Maybe you use BT or some sort of oils. Do you rake up all the leaves under your trees in the fall? Do you burn the debris? What if I told you that you might have exterminated all of the natural pest predators in that fire or drowned them with oils and sprays? Why is it that we feel inclined as people to manage everything? Would you be willing to consider allowing nature to guide you instead? There we go. Okay. Yes.
There you go. Should work.
All right. So I have a picture here of a book, The Insect Crisis. We're seeing a lot of this around in the media. This is by Oliver Millman. Where are the bugs? So I have some statistics up here for you that were pretty compelling to me. So the world has lost 5 to 10% of all insect species in the last 150 years. According to a meta-analysis of 16 studies, insect populations have declined by about 45% in just the last 40 years. Okay, so that second one there, the 45%, that's the total abundance. That's not just a number of species, that's the abundance. That's significant. The planet is losing about 9% of its terrestrial insect population each decade. 9% every 10 years, that's a lot. And that doesn't take into account the aquatic invertebrates, like dragonflies and damselflies and water beetles and water striders and all of these other things that live in fresh water. The one at the bottom, insect abundance is declining by 1 to 2% per year. All of these were pretty alarming statistics, and it is gravely concerning to me because it supports so many other forms of life. So on this slide, why is this happening? My points here are habitat loss, urbanization, suburbanization, mowing, land use change, land use conversion, fire-wise practices, human intervention, our historical and continuing use of pesticides, fertilizers, and herbicides have direct and indirect impacts, and climate change. So add all of that in there together. For us here in the San Juans, I would attribute what we are seeing as a decline due to land use change, and that would be things like forest conversion to home sites, fire-wise practices, and lawns. And so last week I had a conversation with someone at DNR about fire-wise practices. And DNR is getting ready to come out with some new guidelines because they're recognizing that the previous ones are damaging ecosystems by encouraging people to rip out all of the underbrush and park out your landscapes. That understory is really critical. It's also critical in supporting the impacts of climate change. It keeps tree roots more shaded, which helps your trees, all of these things. So they're moving their emphasis to focus on using building materials that are fireproof or are fire resistant. So metal roofs, concrete board siding, things like that. Okay. So this is where I kind of got horrified. I didn't know this before I looked it up, and I'm sure a lot of people don't. So with this historical data, I have a couple of sources listed here on the slide that you can go back and look up for yourself. But in the photo, you see these men spraying, and they're applying lead arsenate in Washington apple orchards. And this is on the mainland. In the late 1800s, there was a pest called the codling moth that was destroying orchards across central Washington. And so some of you know what the codling moth is. So it burrowed into the fruit, causing it to rot. And to protect the fruit, they used lead arsenate to spray on the fruit trees. So the codling moth became resistant to the pesticide, and more of lead arsenate needed to be sprayed over time. So it was used between 1890 and 1950, over and over. Some of these orchards sprayed their fruit trees for decades. The lead and arsenic and the pesticides settle in the soil. They do not break down, and they stick tightly to the soil. So the result was that more than 100,000 acres of former orchard lands in central Washington still have lead arsenic in the soil. In Washington, this was mostly 5 counties that I found: Benton, Chelan, Douglas, Klickitat, Okanogan, and Yakima. And I have this little picture of a copy of my yearbook of agriculture from 1952. It's got a lot of information in it, and a lot of the chemicals that were used throughout that in history. There was also an interesting foreword by the Secretary of Agriculture, Charles Brannan, who admonished us in the forward to take care not to use pesticides with residues that contaminate our foods, not to destroy beneficial wildlife, and not to damage our soils. We haven't done this. We've done the opposite. Somewhat sobering. And on this one, this was a little ad for DDT that I have up here, and they have an apple and a little milkmaid and a cow, and it looks like a potato and a rooster and a dog. But during the 30 years prior to it with cancellation, a total of about 675,000 tons of DDT was used domestically in the US. In 1972, between 4,500 and 6,400 tons of DDT was used in the United States, mostly on cotton crops, and was estimated to account for 67 to 90% of the total of its total use, with the remainder on peanut and soybean crops. So I kind of wonder, you know, I'm 1972, I think I was 7. My mother fed me a lot of peanut butter sandwiches. I'm kind of wondering how much DDT residue was in my sandwich. This little bit was really interesting. So bringing us current, I was scanning through news articles, and this came out of Brewster, Washington, 2023. So on April 6th, the Enforcement and Education Division of the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board announced an administrative hold on all products from 18 licensed cannabis farms in a geographic cluster because products from 6 of the licensees tested over the action limit for a chemical called DDE. And that is one of the, it's a breakdown molecule from DDT. So, which was one of the most ubiquitously sprayed pesticides in the nation and world, especially on tree fruit crops before it was banned more than 50 years ago. So more than 50 years ago, we have residues in marijuana crops now. What they are having to do to mitigate cleanup in these areas, and I think it may be on the Department of Ecology website, they're actually having to remove the soil. It's contaminated well water. It's bad. It kind of makes me think twice about wanting to. I told my husband I wasn't buying any more apples. So here, and bringing us to today, it's even worse than you can imagine. So now we have the neonicotinoids. And they are applied as seed coatings on some 150 million acres of crops each year, including corn, soybeans, and others. They are neurotoxic insecticides similar to nicotine and used widely on farms and in urban landscapes. Homeowners are using them. They are absorbed by plants and can be present in pollen, nectar, and have been blamed for killing bees or changing their behaviors. They're also, well, they're used a lot in seed coatings. So that's one way, but they also spray. They're also, I think imidacloprid is in fipronil. It's in one of the spot treatments that you use to apply on your pets. So think about all the people that have dogs and cats, or they're treating their yards with these products, which the residues don't break down for a very, very, very long time. They're in urine. The farmers tested that were applying or working in farms, they all had it in their urine. 100% of all the farm workers had it in their urine. And then the wells in the Midwest are all contaminated. They're finding well contamination with neonicotinoids everywhere. And then I also looked up and included pyrethroids, which are not a neonicotinoid. Kwiat did a study and they were finding them. This was published in 2022. They were finding them in forage fish. So it's here. There are things, and you can buy pyrethroids at any of the garden centers here. So how does it get into the water? You know, it rains, it washes out. I don't know what we do. I do know that Washington State bill, and I don't know the status of this bill, but it's 5972, and it's going to prohibit a person from using neonicotinoid pesticides on outdoor plants beginning January 1st, 2026. So, if you're interested, go look that one up and follow it or track it to see what happens. I'm curious, it would be good to pull some of these. I don't know why we are even using them. Okay, so safer options, because people see tent caterpillars and they want to do something. Are horticultural oils really safe? This one also is disturbing, just warning you. So horticulture oils target pest insects like scales, mites, aphids, bug moths, etc. They are largely derived from petroleum products, including cottonseed oil and soybean oil. Two of those products that are also being sprayed with neonicotinoids. So you can figure that your horticultural oil probably has some nice neonicotinoids in it as well. I didn't look that up, I'm just assuming. So if you go to the MSDS safety sheet, and with any product that you buy at the store, I would encourage you, and they're hard to find sometimes, they are burrowed in layers. You have to go and really look. If you go and look up the MSDS safety sheet, you can read the ingredients, you can read the warnings, you can see that when it comes to carcinogenicity and some other effects, some of these don't even have any studies. They don't know. I mean, I pulled up 4 or 5, including safer, and they all have potential risk. And so when you're using a product, if you get to that point, at least take the time to look up the MSDS safety sheet. But they also, the horticultural oils, when you spray, even in winter, there's lots of little spiders that are living in these nooks and crannies in your trees. So some of these pest predators, like the spider in the bottom corner here, which is, he's even smaller, real sized, teeny tiny little guy. They are, they're all over the trees. I mean, you can shake a branch onto a white sheet and things will fall out, so you can kind of see what's there. When I went for a walk the other day and looked at a really old Douglas fir tree, I noticed that there must be thousands and thousands of tiny spiders. The bark had in little spots all the way up, and I couldn't put my arms around the tree. It was so big. They're little bitty webs all the way up, and there are little spiders living in all of these. One of my friends is Rod Crawford. He's the spider guy at the Burke Museum. And one of his research associates is friends with me as well. And I sent her a message and I was like, Laurel, she's studying how many spiders are in the pine cones or fir cones. That's been her area of work. So they've done studies in different areas. And I have not had time to read her paper yet. She sent me the latest one last night, late. And what she's finding, I mean, there are the little pine cones or fir cones offer a place for shelter. The spiders, I think there was like maybe 1 or 2 spiders per cone, but that's what they're finding, 1 or 2 per cone out of the ones that they surveyed. How many cones is in a tree? How many little spiders are living in these little sheltered places, and what is their role? Because some of them are so tiny, we don't see what they're doing, but they are doing. They're doing what they're supposed to do, which is to help control pests. So I'm interested in knowing, what comes out of this research, if they're going to come up with any conclusive data about how many spiders might live in a tree and how many different spiders. She does have it outlined by species. If anybody wants to read the paper, I'm happy to email it to you. And here, let's see, did I go too far? I did. All right. This came from somebody on Orcas to my social media group. And this is a Johnson jumping spider, and it was eating a tent caterpillar. And we were so excited to see this. These are the cutest little spiders. And I've had spiders on the side of my house come out after the tent caterpillars and termites or whatever else lands. They're behind the siding, and it's amazing. Something will land and they're out and they're on it. So here is a picture from a friend of mine in Eastern Washington, Carl Barentine, and Carl has been my moth mentor. And he found it's a fall cankerworm moth. And this was interesting because the three jumping spiders, these are zebra jumping spiders, and they are teeny tiny. They were on the moth eating it. So I was observing this little tent in one of our plum trees over the weekend, and we haven't had many tent moths. I don't know why, because other people on San Juan have really gone crazy, and I know other island communities have suffered. All I can tell you is we don't mow in our orchard. It's pretty what I would call pretty mangy. We don't mow, we don't cut the grass around it. It's just kind of wild, and it's old. And but I have some younger plum trees, and there's a tiny tent in one of them. And I was going to take a picture of it, and as I squeezed that part of the little twig to focus my camera, one of these little jumping spiders jumped out of the tent to get away from me. And so in the past, when I found old tents and I've looked through, I have found jumping spiders, other species of jumping spiders, and earwigs, strangely, eating the tent caterpillars. So there's a lot going on. There are other things eating them. We had hummingbirds or I think it was a hummingbird picking some of the webbing, and they use webbing like this or spider webbing to build their nest. And then we did see some chickadees that were plucking the caterpillars out. So there are things that eat them. And this is my next slide, and I took this picture out our window. We have chickadees that nest, and this is really important to me because birds eat bugs, so do fish, snakes, bats, lizards, frogs, and flying squirrels. So I looked up some information about the chickadee, and it says that both parents take turns feeding the chicks, and they have to fly back to the nest every 3 minutes, bringing a caterpillar or something for them. And they do it from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. for 16 to 18 days that it takes for the chick to fledge. So figuring caterpillars, that was 350 to 570 caterpillars per day. That's a lot for one nest of chickadees. And over the 18-day time period, it was like 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars required to make one clutch of chickadees. That's an enormous amount of bugs. Why would we take the pantry away from the birds? Oh, yeah, and I looked up robins because my mother loves robins. So I found this little bit of data about robins. Robins have to make about 100 feeding visits to their nest per day. And each nestling can eat 14 feet of earthworms in 2 weeks of their nest life. That's a lot of earthworms. So hummingbirds feed their babies insects, but actually hummingbird adult diet, a lot of people don't understand this either. It is primarily 80% insects and spiders. They do take nectar, but they need insects and spiders. I like this. I like to kind of, the analogy would be like, if you just drank Coca-Cola all day, every day, you're not getting any vitamins. So when they're sourcing different sorts of food or nectar from different plants, they are getting a well-rounded diet. They cannot get their diet. Birds are not going to get their nutritious needs met from what we hang outside in a feeder or what we put in seed-wise. There's just not enough. But hummingbirds, the list of the things that they eat, ants, aphids, fruit flies, gnats, weevils, beetles, mites, and mosquitoes. And they will raid spider webs to take the spiders and whatever the spiders have caught. Industrious little fellows. This was kind of sad, but I wanted to make this point too. We have had violet green tree swallows in our boxes for 4 or 5 years now. And last year, well, this is the previous year, this wasn't last year, but this, I photographed the adult and it was getting the carpenter ant alates, the winged reproductives that fly, and it kept bringing carpenter ants back to feed the babies. And last year, I noticed the adults were not catching very many insects. Strangely, we didn't have any carpenter ant alates that I could find anywhere. I didn't see any. We don't use any pesticides at all. And I mentioned to my husband that I suspected that the adults had abandoned their nest. And when we took the boxes down the end of the season to clean them, the fledglings or the nestlings were dead. So they did not have enough food to have reproductive success. And they are really adorable. They eat a lot of mosquitoes. They're really important in our ecosystem. So I think it's important to support them. You guys, I have a lizard. I don't think this is not going to actually play the video, but what is down here on the ground, those are subterranean termites. And we have an old colony of subterranean termites that have lived under our driveway since we bought our house 10 years ago. And it's fascinating. Every year around September, I start looking around September 8th, and I think I've gone as late as the 14th. And it's they send out their reproductives out of this one little spot in the ground, just like a well. And it's always after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's always after there's been a moisture event, and they'll start coming out and birds start getting really noisy. And I took Drago out because in the wild in Australia, bearded dragons like to eat termites, and he was having a great time. But then I noticed there were warblers. I picked him up. I wasn't going to let him eat all of them. And the warblers were down on the ground in they're coming out of this one little hole, and they're just covering, a spot probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 feet in diameter. And then they start to take off and they go west away from our house, which is good also. We've never had any problem with termites. So, anyway, but what I read about warblers was that they can live 6 or 7 years and they migrate and come back. So when these birds migrate and come back, lots of times they come back to the same spot. They find the same spot. So it is not unheard of to think that at 6 or 7 years that these warblers coming back every year, they know exactly where that spot is. It provides them with the energy they need right before they have to migrate back to Central America or South America. So they know where these little caches of food are, and it's just incredibly important. So I try to dissuade people from using baits and poisons for these things. Like I said, we have an old house, and if it was going to get eaten up by termites, it probably would have happened already. That's my 2 cents. Here, oh, it is going to play. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's 10 years old. We try to help him have a good quality of life, and yeah. It's great until you have him in the yard and a queen bumblebee flies by, because yeah, I won't put my hand in. He's bitten me accidentally a couple of times, and it always draws blood, and it's not pleasant. So yeah. Okay, so I wanted to just put it on your plate some of these other native herps we have in the San Juans that eat bugs. There's a northern alligator lizard here, a northwestern salamander here. Those are really cool. The little Pacific tree frog and a rough-skinned newt. All of these species depend on invertebrates, both aquatic and terrestrial, to live. They don't have a grocery store to go to like we do, so they are going to need to eat bugs. I looked up the northern alligator lizard because it's interesting. Its diet is made up of termites, beetles, ticks, spiders, millipedes, and snails, and it occasionally will take small birds, mammals, and other lizards. That's from the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and Quiot had some information about them that was great. Moths, they have that they eat moths, beetles, and other insects, as well as slugs and snails, which they locate by smell, burrowing beneath rocks and logs. So these little lizards right here are really important in your garden. And here we have, I've only seen one of these in 15 years. It's a northern red-legged frog. It's in decline. They usually like wetland areas. And we have this little garter snake over here, but there are others, including western fence lizards, sharp-tailed snakes, which eat slugs. And Quiot has great profiles of these on their website, as does the Bird Museum, if you're looking for more information, incorporating them into your garden spaces. I would encourage you to think about them and their dependence on the abundance of insects in order to survive. And here, how can you help? Again, get to know, recognize, and be pals with predators. A lot of people don't like spiders. I've handled these jumping spiders, I don't know how many times. They're too little. Even if you're afraid of spiders, they are too little to pierce your skin. You're going to smush them before they would ever bite you, and they're not medically significant. So spiders like this one and the ones in the earlier slides are eating your pest. They are not leaving behind toxic chemical residues that take forever to degrade. There are also other pest predators include flies, beetles, even earwigs can be predators, wasps, birds, snakes, lizards, and all the aforementioned. And another way to help create bug and wildlife friendly spaces by adding native plants. I can't stress this enough. Even planting a few native shrubs in your garden, like currant or ossoberry, Oregon grape, it helps feed bumblebees and hummingbirds early in the season. Surely, there's a way to arrange a spot, even in a pot, to put something. So to support some of these, you don't necessarily need water features for native bees, but water features support other organisms. I have on here a hibernaculum, and the San Juan Preservation Trust, Ruthie, put together a really great video on what the heck's a hibernaculum. It's on YouTube. I think you can find it through, if you go to YouTube and look up San Juan Preservation Trust and hibernaculum, you can find that. It's really great. It's really simple. All we did was throw some rocks and some rotting wood and kind of piled it up in a corner, in various corners. And you can even lay down a flat piece of wood. Snakes like to get under that. There are pill bugs and earwigs and things that will crawl under it, seeking some moisture. And it gives the snakes or the lizards a place to hide. They're protected. And they also will come out and eat your pest predators. So we try to create spaces, living spaces, safe living spaces for them. So I also wanted to recommend that check out what some other people are doing. If you're on social media or internet savvy, these are some of my favorites. Bee Sip, Crystal Hickman. She is not an entomologist, but she's been photographing native bees, and her work is phenomenal. She's been featured, I think, on National Geographic. I got a hold of her to get her flashcards. So she has flashcards of native bees that are in a little box. I'm still learning my native bees all the time. What's this one? On Instagram, there is Rewilding Suburbia. This gal is in Australia, but she has made her yard into the most biologically diverse, amazing place. And all she does is take pictures of the insects and mostly native bees that are there. There's just, it gives you ideas on what you can create in your own garden to make this utopia. Chasing Bugs, Danae Wolf, she has a lot about gardening or making insect habitat in your backyard, supporting native bugs. And the Xerces Society, and I found over the weekend, they have a whole YouTube channel with everything you could imagine on how to support native insects. So
the next slide here tolerates some herbivory because all caterpillars, they become pollinators. This is caterpillar. He fascinated a lot of people on my bug blog through the pandemic, and it was on the mint outside. And I actually had a couple of people on San Juan that would message me at 8 o'clock in the evening. Are you going to go out and look for it? You know, because I would go out every night and find him. There was only one, and it's a salt and pepper moth. It turns what it turns into, which is kind of a nondescript. It's one of those moths they did the experiments on in England, I think, about they change colors to match with the smog and soot. But this little guy is just, it was just adorable. Of course, he could eat my mint. So, and they are food for wildlife at all stages of their life. Caterpillars, even the eggs. I had some tent caterpillar eggs on one of my currants that disappeared. I was hoping to watch a video of them hatching and something ate them. But birds do eat them over the winter. Okay, and here, try and embrace your moths. You know, again, all of these, most of these in my assortment here, not all of them, but they're in the family Noctuidae, which are the owlet moths, because they're really cute and they have little owl faces like this little guy here, or this one here. Just, I like to take pictures of their little faces because they do look like owls. The owlet moths are called in the caterpillar stage by a lot of people. They refer to all of them. If you find one in your garden soil, especially the pupal case, they're kind of red. It's a cutworm, squish it. Only it could be this one, which is that it's just pupating in the soil. It's not a cutworm. It's not one of the ones that eat roots at all. It's a different species, but they're all going to be pupating. They all crawl off, they wander off, and they are all pupating in the soil, and all the pupal cases look alike. And it's almost impossible, even for somebody that's a specialist in moth taxonomy, they'll tell you themselves, it's almost impossible to thread these out and know which one until they emerge. So I don't squish. I will relocate into a similar environment if I have to. And I can come back. I don't know how we're doing on time. I can come back and read you the IDs of these, but I just wanted to show you a sampling. I've been setting up a moth light at night with help from my friend Carl, and he does Eastern Washington moths, and on his website, it's phenomenal. All of the things that he's recorded, and he's a retired biologist and teacher, and I think he's got 4 light traps. He has events. People go to his property to see what to help and see what he's finding. We need to record these. I don't kill anything. I'm not saving anything. They're all released humanely. I just want to take their picture. Here we have some more, just to show you the diversity of the ones. And over here, I don't know if you recognize these two. This little guy is the one that everybody loves to hate, the vilified tent moth. And I did have a conversation with some scientists at the University of Washington, and they were doing studies sampling the stomach contents of the Chinook salmon and some other species of salmon. And the salmon feed along the nearshore habitat between maybe April to September before they grow enough to move out to deeper waters. While they're in this habitat, they're still feeding vertically, so things that plop into the water. Well, they found in their stomach sampling that one year it was full of tent moths, and they even sent me some really cool pictures that they had of the tent moths that they got out of the stomachs of these salmon. The other one were Christinuma, another kind of leaf roller moth that a lot of people don't like, but the salmon were eating these. So the moths, like this one up in the corner, that's a phantom hemlock looper. And I got an email from somebody kayaking out, I think they were kayaking to Orcas. They said there were hundreds of them falling into the water along the shoreline, and they wanted to know what they were. Well, the adult moths will migrate to territory. They fly off in mass to migrate to a territory where they can lay eggs and have successful reproduction. Maybe the trees that or the area that they've come from isn't suitable anymore, so they take off. Well, when they take off, a lot of them don't make it and they fall into the water, and that's food for marine life. So a lot of these, and it's a valuable, that was the other thing that they asked me to point out. They're like, you need to emphasize to people that terrestrial insects have, you know, the things that they're eating and picking up and all of the vitamins and minerals. It's different from what the fish are getting in the near shore habitat. And it's really important for them to be healthy and to grow fast enough so that they have success when they are feeding and moving and feeding in far shore waters. You know, it all comes down to, you know, we are conscientious about eating a healthy diet and trying to incorporate different foods. And if you eat peanut butter sandwiches to drink Coca-Cola all the time, you're not going to be healthy. All life needs to have this. Appreciate your flies. So a lot of people ask me about keeping bees and saving the bees, and you know, they're talking about honeybees, and honeybees kind of in the canary in the coal mine. They're managed, people can watch them. We knew something was wrong. All of the wild ones are not. It's harder to keep track of what's going on. And it's too cold here for honeybees. Honeybees don't like to fly if it's not above 50 degrees. Your trees are blooming. All these things are blooming. It's 45 degrees. And, you know, the pollinators that you're going to find, and I took these pictures, or this one, this weekend in our orchard. These are dance flies. And I put a link here that you may want to go back so you can look at some of these pictures that are on Bug Guide. I love Bug Guide. So the story with these, they are pollinators and pest predators. So these are both female flies, and you can see right there, that's her ovipositor. The males are a little different back there, but the males of this species will go and collect some little invertebrate like a march fly, which are also flying around right now. And they make a little balloon sack with the bug in it. And they all fly around, all the males do. And they're dancing around with these little balloons. And you can see the balloons on if you go to the link, to attract a female in order to get her to mate. They give her the balloon with the bug. She eats the bug. He's got access then. And so, but it's really quite amazing that they have this dual function and that really cool beak. They're quite, I thought they were beautiful. I think they kind of look a little bit like a vulture head to me, but anyway, they can fly at much lower temperatures. So they can be out pollinating when honeybees can't. Oh, erasing this here. Okay, can you hear me? Am I still on? Okay. So this is not a pollinator, but this is a pest predator. You may see these in your garden. They're great because they eat aphids. They love aphids. This little guy is pretty small. And up here you can see it's caught a small, probably that was an aphid. We had a lot of aphids on our basil that was outside, but the flies and the hummingbirds were picking them off. My husband decided to move it to the greenhouse, and then the aphids overran. The basil that was it. The basil needed more heat. I don't think basil grows well there, not on our property. So, but these little flies they like to perch on vegetation, and you can watch them, and they're scanning the environment, and they will take off after a small bug, and they catch a lot of them. I enjoy watching them. So here we have what gets mistaken a lot for housefly. This isn't a housefly, it's a cluster fly. They are also one of our really important early pollinators. They were on our plum trees, and they resemble houseflies. They are labeled a nuisance sometimes because they tend to take shelter in people's houses or human structures, but they aren't interested in human food like houseflies or anything like that. And they go back out outside when it warms up. And there are 6 Pollinaria species in North America. And the curious thing about these flies is they parasitize earthworms. So the flies will lay their eggs. I see them out in our yard a lot in March even, and they're swarming around low to the ground and picking places to bask. But they deposit their eggs on top of the soil. The eggs hatch, the larvae migrate to find earthworms, and they parasitize the earthworm. So it's kind of an understudied, well, it's studied and understudied in some ways than others, but I just wanted you to see these so you recognize them as a really, you know, these are all pollinators. They're also food for wildlife. And here, this was also just this weekend. It's still pretty cool. We had a march fly. That's the bottom of the march fly that was in the, I think it was a plum tree. And I put pictures here of, this is the same species, the male and female. So over here, you've got the male with the big eyes, and the female is over here, and her eyes are really small. These are some of the flies that are captured by the one I showed earlier that makes the balloon sack and dances around to give the girl a present. They found that some of these adult vibrio flies like these are important pollinators in orchards. So again, these are insects that can tolerate the cooler temperatures that we want pollinating, especially fruit trees this time of year. And here's another one that's kind of a favorite. So this is a spilomai fly, flower fly. It's in the family Syrphidae. And syrphid flies, and there are many species of syrphid flies here. They're really fascinating because their larvae prey on aphids, and the adult flies will actually seek out an aphid-infested plant to lay their eggs on. So then that's kind of how this works. This one is a yellow jacket mimic, or also called a hornet fly. This one's different. The larvae are saproxylic, and so they need a rotting wet hole in a tree to develop. So I thought, I'm gonna look around some of our fruit trees in the orchard and put some well water and make sure that because they're so beautiful. I just want to make sure I have plenty to photograph. Sadly, these are supposed to be declining because of the loss of old growth trees. That people are cleaning up too much. They're taking too much down, too much of these, you know, we leave snags, rotting wood rotting wood you know, wherever it falls for the most part, unless it falls on the house, it's going to stay where it fell. So, but because they're dependent on that, they're losing habitat. And that's the case with a lot of these insects, that they're losing habitat due to land use changes. But my ending point here on the flies and comparing them with the honeybees as pollinators is that flies actually fill they fill many ecological niches, from being a pest predator to a pollinator or both. They are also food for many other species of wildlife, birds, bats, reptiles, amphibians. Some of them have amazing life histories with mimicry like this, and behaviors. There are some canopid flies. They're called thick-headed flies, and I was over the moon because I got video of some of their behavior, and all of these dipterists were, you know, that they like, oh, you have to send it to X, Y, and Z because we have never seen this before. We don't know what they're doing. And they parasitize different types of native bees. So some people don't see them as valuable, but the behavior is amazing. And they have what is called a behavior called hilltopping, where lots of times they'll go back to a landmark, kind of like the warbler finding the hole in the ground where the termites are coming out. At that point in time, these insects will find a landmark, and who knows why. I have a neighbor down the road from us that bought a house, and historically this electric box, which is painted white, on her property, has had cluster flies there in the spring. There'd be a million. I mean, you'd kind of think there was a corpse or something just without knowing what they were. And she was very alarmed by it. She sent me pictures. She's like, what are these? You know, why are they here? And I said, well, it's probably a landmark for them for some reason, because we're just a few houses down and they're not in our house. But it also could be that the box is painted white. And I find that a lot of flies are attracted to white. We have tachinid flies and that parasitize the tent caterpillars. They lay the little eggs on the head. They like my daisies, and the daisies kind of stink, but they are all over. Tachinid flies are all over those daisy blooms. So anyway, it was just something I wanted to share. I could go on and on about flies. If I had to pick a specialty, I probably would study flies. We overlook a lot of their importance. And here, here is this thick-headed fly I was telling you about, and I have some video, but I caught him in this yoga position. This has been several years, and I've actually gotten video of them where they're multiple. I've got some really strange videos of these flies. But anyway, I just wanted you to see a picture of that, and encourage you to do some searching on your own if you want to know more. I have an app on my phone called iNaturalist. And so when I'm outside, it's easy to carry my iPhone around, and I have, it's in my pocket, this little gadget I got on, if I have time, you can check it out. I got this on Amazon, and I've upgraded a few times. This is an apexel. It is a clip-on macro lens. It's $30. It goes onto your phone lens, and then you can see up close. And I can't see up close very well anymore. But it's enabled me to get some pictures of teeny tiny things and observe. And then I upload everything to iNaturalist because I like to keep track of what I've seen. And I can go back through, and somebody can describe a bug to me and say, well, it was June 1st, and it's got yellow legs, and it's got a really long, weird thing on its butt. And I can tell them what it is. Because you kind of learn these cycles, and you learn what's out when, and the environment it was found in. Is it found on wood? Is it found on a flower? All of these different things. But the macro lens, iNaturalist, there is a book I think I had recommended to Kate, Bugs of the Pacific Northwest. It's by Merrill Peterson, who's affiliated with Western Washington University. And that's a great pictorial reference book. I do a lot of social media, obviously, because of my own outreach, but I have my own bug group on Facebook, Bugs of the San Juan Islands, and I think we have about 1,400 members from different islands. There's also Pacific Northwest Bugs. I admin in that group, and I have 20,000 people or more. Stay away from Pacific Northwest entomology. None of the entomologists, we don't like that group. It's a lot of misinformation. But all bugs go to Kevin Weiner. He is a reformed pest control person. And so now he is working, and he's phenomenal. Kevin is such a great guy. So he's working to advocate for bug conservation. He's doing a great job. All bugs go to Kevin. I love his site. Ant-Man's Hill, that's another one. If you're traveling, depending on where you are, if I'm in the Pacific Northwest, I encourage people to put them in Pacific Northwest bug groups. But if you're somewhere else, you might want to look at some of these other groups. And then you can also always email me. I'm local, and I have a website at buggingyoufromsanjuanisland.com. And I would also encourage everyone here who remembers Joni Mitchell to go listen to some of her music today, and let her continue to inspire us to be better stewards of this special place that we all share as our home. I'm hoping you will find the information that I've presented today to be useful in helping you transform your garden into a biodiverse paradise where all creatures can blossom. And I assure you it will be worth it, especially if you get into bug watching. Thank you.
So
going further, I just wanted to let you know that I did include some references. And, just in case, if you're ever interested in reading something specific about something or have a question, please let me know, because I can probably find you a scientific article that'll address it, and, or contact a specialist, in some things. But I think learning and changing our perspective about things is what's going to be important going forward. Conservation is really critical. Oh, and there, I'll end it. This is a steerfoot fly larva. And she got she got all these little aphids. They were just sucked dry. And the aphids just sort of sit there like a little flock of sheep. But they're very effective pest predators. Flies, steerfoot flies like wet, muddy places to develop. So, maybe you can create a mud area in your garden too. All right. Any questions? Yes.
I have an alder tree, that I had an arborist. I have an alder tree, is that better?
I can hear you fine.
I think so. Thank you. Okay, I don't know if it's gonna work. Anyway, I have an alder tree and, that is rotting, and I didn't realize it was rotting, but I had an arborist come out because I wanted to have some of the branches limbed so I could more shade, more sun from the garden. And he discovered that it was rotting and it's got termites in it. And,
Right.
so of course he's telling me, to cut it down, blah, blah, blah. But now you're talking about termites, I'm wondering if I should just leave it there. I mean, I don't really think it's gonna fall anytime soon.
We have, above our house, actually above our sunroom, we have a, maple tree that's really old and it's rotting and dying. And so, I'm home watching out of this window a lot, and I watch the birds, and they go around. We have woodpeckers. So woodpeckers are going to be your friend here. They'll take that tree down for you. But what I've watched them do on this maple tree is up at the top where it's dying first. They go around, and every so often there'll be a little chunk that falls off, a little piece where they've gotten a branch and gone all the way around it, and it goes to the ground. It's not going to hurt our roof, when it comes apart like that. The tree is not going to fall over like some of these Doug firs do in big windstorms. And so, my husband initially wanted to just cut it down. It's like, no, we're gonna leave it. I like it. The birds use it. Look at how many woodpeckers are using this tree. We're just gonna leave it there. What I ask people to do is consider, if you have to, just cut the top and leave the rest. And leave the rest that you cut out on the ground. When we were walking this past weekend at one of the preserves on one of the land bank preserves on San Juan, there are small diameter Doug fir trees. And, my husband, some of you may know this or not already, but I guess I'll hesitantly, my husband's the land bank director. And so I like to boss him around sometimes with this stuff, but I'm like, okay, so there's termite frass in here. This is Pacific dampwood termite frass. You guys aren't going to cut these down in your forest thinning, right? Because the birds are, you could see where the birds were just cleaning up. And he's like, oh, well, that's kind of interesting. No, I don't think they're going to do anything. So I'll tell them, to leave those there. But I think a lot of people want to jump in with all of these forest management practices or fire wising practices. And I'm like, just give nature a chance. It's going to do it for you. If it's not an immediate risk to trash your house. And honestly, sometimes I was like, oh, please fall down, tree, because we need a new roof. And I would be like, can we get a new roof? But seriously, I get so much pleasure from watching the birds. And pileated woodpecker diet is 95% carpenter ants. Flickers, northern flickers, 95% ants for them. Harry's, downies, the other one is the red-breasted sapsucker, and they need alder for that's what they like, is alder. And they like alder cavities to nest in. And so we're losing, I don't know if many of you noticed, at least where we are on San Juan, I'm noticing we're not having much alder regeneration, and it's a successional tree. strangely, I had grown one from seed and it got to be a good size. We planted it by the pond. We caged it. And it was in what I would call perfect habitat and it died. I don't know why. It died very quickly. And so I don't know if something's happening with the alder, but there are a lot of organisms that depend on alder. And at a minimum, if you do have to cut it down, don't burn it. Just I cut it into what I did was we had wood logs cut up and somebody else's property. They were gonna burn it. And I said, no, I want it. So I took it and I stacked it kind of to make a natural fence. It looks kind of cool. You know, and things can live in it and it provides habitat for birds. It provides habitat for lizards and it's nicer to look at than a man-made fence. I prefer this natural looking aesthetic much more. But I can't, I try to refrain from giving pesticide advice. I can. Your best friend, what you need to do to avoid having pests like carpenter ants and termites in your house is make sure you don't have water leaks. Most of all of this could be resolved if you correct the water leak problem. Clean your gutters out. Don't stack firewood up against your house. Don't mulch right up against your house. Keep, you know, if you have tree limbs that are going onto the house, maybe prune those back a little bit so that they don't have a way to get up the tree and onto the wood. But they're looking for wet, primarily wet, rotting wood. And we don't clean up a whole lot, so there's plenty of rotting wood left around on our property. It's fun to go look and see what's in it.
Any other questions? How about online?
No. Did you have a question?
Well, I was just, yeah. I recently, I do have a carpenter ant problem,
Mhm.
but I do have a lot of flickers, so I'm feeling good. I think maybe there'll be a balance. But I was just recently gonna put some cedar chips along the house.
Mhm.
Is that not a good thing?
I
Does it hold in?
found that putting any kind of chips up near the house provides habitat for the ants. The birds will go down in it too, but it's just what your comfort level may be. We've not chipped anything around I try to keep wood chips away from the house. Just my 2 cents.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
So you mentioned, excuse me, you mentioned the spiders like to be in the fir cones. And so all the fir cones are all over the ground that I want to rake up and I
Yeah.
do rake up and I don't know what to do with them. Do they still have the spiders in them?
Yes.
They do.
They
So
do.
I shouldn't burn them or something.
No, don't burn them. And you know, it's really, it's kind of scary because I saw on a post on social media on Lopez Island the other day and I thought, oh no. So this was addressing the tent caterpillars and somebody's got one of these memes with somebody spraying like a flame, you know, he was encouraging people to burn them out. There was a woman on San Juan Island, was last year, the year before, she got up on a ladder in her apple orchard with a flamer to flame these things. She fell, she broke her arm, and she could have had a much worse injury, but burning just releases more carbon into the atmosphere. Put it somewhere, rake it into a corner, if you can leave it, I mean, I just rake the pine cones into a part of the yard and leave them there. I never thought about burning. I'm terrified of fire. We had a fire a couple of summers ago from about a mile away from our house, and it's a code enforcement issue. But anyway, they started a fire. It was getting out of control, and we only have one entrance and exit out of our neighborhood. And so fire is a real thing. I'm just so against burning any of this. Don't burn any of it. Clip it, pile it up, throw it on the ground. You don't need to burn 10 caterpillars. If you throw them on the ground, the ants will eat them. And then the flickers will come along and eat the ants. And So fire is, yeah, we don't like fire. The other thing with carpenter ants is if they are in your house, usually you can hear them. We had them in our skylight. And I kind of snickered. I was on the couch with my daughter at the time and I said, "Oh, honey, you've got a project." And he can't hear very well. And he's like, "What is it?" And I said, "Well, I think there's carpenter ants up here. We can hear them chewing." So immediately he's panicked and he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna take the wood out." That skylight was leaking when we bought the house. So he's grumbling. He's got a ladder. He's up on the ladder and he's, trying to pry all this wood out. Well, the whole satellite nest fell on him. He's got carpenter and like, oh, we were kind of standing there amused. I mean, he's like, "Get the vacuum." So, we had 2 vacuums going, trying to vacuum the carpenter ants. But once we cleaned out the rotting wood and put new wood in, we have not had any problems since then. I do keep an eye out. You can go under your house if you have an under area. You can look under your house for termites. They make like the subterranean termites. So sometimes they'll make these little mud tubes if they're coming up. So I check. But in 10 years, I've never seen. I mean, it's not like one doesn't fly into the house when they're sending out their alates. They don't survive, and most of those, when they reproduce and they send out thousands or millions of termites into the air, you have to think about this. Most of these do not survive. They do not survive. They're eaten. They're supposed to go out like that because they're food for other wildlife. Almost none of them will successfully make it to a place where they can mate and start a new colony. So it's important to keep the ones. I just think it's important to keep them going. Plus, they're kind of cool. I had a woman on Orcas call me a few years ago, and she's like, "Oh my God, you were right. It's like September 12th. They're coming out at my house." And I looked out the window, and that's about the same time that mine started coming out. The termites were coming out of the ground. It was so cool to see. It's just really neat to get excited and to see the wildlife, flock to this spot. So, and with tent caterpillars, yes, I would just encourage you to refrain. The best practice for tent caterpillars is to take a long handle brush, just brush them out and put them on the ground. You don't need to burn. You could start a fire. We had issues last year where people, they start issuing burn permits in September or after it's rained a little bit. Well, now they're rethinking some of this because people started a burn pile. They thought it was out and it had rained, but it hadn't rained enough. The tree roots underground were very, very dry. And even though the fire looked like it was out on top, underneath it was not. And so the tree roots reignited and it spread. And so there were several fires that I know of that happened like this. So you need to be conscious, especially Doug fir tree roots are really shallow, and they're not so far down below ground. It's going to take a while for them to get wet enough that you could safely have a fire. And I think we all need to be cognizant that most fires are started by human activity. Most wildfires are started by human activity, but we don't need to burn all of this stuff.
Do you have any suggestions on how to keep yellow jackets away from your house?
Yes.
And,
Make peace with the.
Oh, I know. They were bad last year. I was very frustrated and I try to be tolerant of all insects. Yellow jackets were so bad last year. I was going outside with heavy duty like Carhartt pants on and long sleeve, like stuff that, but even then I got stung and I have strong reactions. So they do, what I understand about yellow jackets is that they get kind of gnarly in late summer and they've been feeding on a lot of this rotted fruit. So stay away from that. Maybe, that's one thing. I think when they're at that point, I was standing in the yard and one just came up and nailed me. I wasn't doing anything to provoke it. Sometimes it's just, are they drunk? That's what somebody had suggested, that they're actually intoxicated from the fermented fruit. And then there are other things that they've lost. The queen has died and they're kind of all, like, their organization is falling apart. I think, could you set a yellow jacket trap at that part of the year, the late part, maybe? I'm sensitive to people who are sensitive to being stung. I've been stung worse by honeybees, and I did have, as part of my graduate work, I had to study honeybees. So I had hives for several years. I was really, it's mixed. I love the way they smell. I love the odor. I had one of the hives up next to a bedroom window, and it was really nothing short of like amazing to open the window and smell the bees through there, but they would die. They just, there's not enough food, and they're competing with native species at the end of the season. So we have such a short growing season that certainly by July, there's not much blooming. So all of these little native bees that live here that need to finish up their life cycle so that they can reproduce, there are suddenly an influx of honeybees that are now out and about and they're agitated because they're starving, or their honeybee caretaker is feeding them. So most of the honey that you get, unless somebody's doing something that I don't know about, my experience is in order to keep my honeybees alive, I had to feed them sugar water from maybe March, April, May, sometimes into June, depending. I mean, I remember one July here, it was so cold, I had my coat on July 4th. So you're getting honey that's made from sugar water. And probably the sugar was sprayed with neonicotinoids. I don't know. But we switched to agave syrup. I don't know if that's really, it's supposed to be better for your glycemic index. It's plant-based, but I'm not keeping honeybees anymore. And I'm trying to learn my native bee species and support them in our ecosystems.
Thank you so much. I have other questions I want to ask you, but I think.
Yeah, we're at time. Okay. Well,
I will be time. You'll be here for a few minutes
if anybody has any questions, and I welcome any emails or, feel free to reach out. I try.